Lewis Hamilton called Leclerc an idiot over the radio during the Singapore Grand Prix. Didn't you catch it on TV? Let me tell you, it wasn't by accident. They tried to cover it up, but we're here to break it down for you. Stick around until the end to hear all the details. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. The atmosphere over Marina Bay was suffocating, the night heavy with moisture that clung to everything like an invisible weight. The drivers weren't just competing against each other. They were fighting the heat, the humidity that soaked through their fireproof suits, the fog that tried to blur their visors. Each lap was like a slow burn, the relentless street circuit punishing every ounce of concentration, with the concrete barriers looming close enough to destroy careers in the blink of an eye. Under the floodlights, the track glittered like a stage built for gladiators, and Lewis Hamilton was throwing himself into the battle with every shred of willpower he had left. He was chasing Charles Leclerc with ferocity, the kind of pursuit that came from more than just a desire to win points. It was personal, fueled by pride, rivalry, and a deep resentment brewing within the Ferrari garage. Both Scarlet cars weren't just playing the team game. They were engaged in a dangerous civil war, their strategies tangled in a knife fight where every call from the pit wall felt like a gamble, every corner a confrontation. Red Bull lurked nearby, Mercedes waited for blood to be spilled, but the true contest of the night was two men driving the same badge yet refusing to acknowledge each other as allies. As Hamilton approached turn 7, the moment built like a crescendo. DRS flung open. The Ferrari under him unleashed its full power as he dove into the braking zone later than anyone thought possible. The maneuver was bold yet clinical, as if carved with mathematical precision. He placed the car exactly where it needed to be, lining it up with flawless intent, sliding ahead with a level of control that screamed experience and dominance. The nose of his machine was already past Leclerc's front wheels, and by the time he reached the apex, the position should have been beyond dispute. The geometry of racing said it was his, the unwritten code of drivers said it was his, every fraction of logic pointed to one conclusion: the move was done. Yet Charles had no desire to accept reality. In his mind, yielding was a form of defeat, a sign of weakness he could not show, not to Hamilton, not to the team, not to himself. This wasn't just about losing a corner. This was about proving he would never be pushed aside, not even by a teammate with 7 world titles. So he refused to lift. He kept his foot crushed against the accelerator, carrying more speed than reason allowed, ignoring the danger, ignoring the risk. It was pure defiance, a scream of rebellion without words, a refusal to bend in the face of pressure. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. For Hamilton, time fractured into fragments of instinct. He realized in that terrifying heartbeat that if he didn't react, if he held the line as he had every right to, both Ferraris would be destroyed against the steel barriers, their race ending in fire and debris. The humiliation would be unbearable, the headlines merciless, Ferrari disgraced under the eyes of millions. In that instant, survival won over anger. He tugged the steering wheel, shifting off the razor-perfect racing line, forcing his machine to twitch and wobble as sparks showered from beneath the floor. The car trembled, balance slipping away, and with it went the tenths of a second he had fought so hard to create. Leclerc pounced like a predator sensing weakness. His Scarlet car surged back, reclaiming the lead with a defiant flourish, the engine screaming through the humid air as though mocking the veteran left behind. For the crowd, it was electric, but for Hamilton, it was agony. The precision, the bravery, the perfect calculation, all undone by a single act of obstinacy from the man wearing the same colors. Inside his helmet, fury erupted. His chest heaved, adrenaline spiked, and the radio crackled with the raw edge of rage. What the hell is this guy doing? His voice was sharp, venomous, a blade cutting through static. He's an idiot. Absolute idiot. The words weren't strategy, they weren't explanation. They were an outpouring of unfiltered wrath, a veteran reduced to disbelief at the audacity he had just witnessed. In the garage, silence lingered as engineers and strategists listened. They understood what was brewing, the storm building between their two drivers. This wasn't a simple on-track clash. It was a fracture in Ferrari's very core, a conflict that would spill far beyond Singapore. As Hamilton steadied his car, eyes narrowed behind the visor, he knew this fight wasn't over. What had just happened wasn't about a single corner. It was the start of something far bigger, an internal war destined to tear through the team, with every lap of the season serving as fuel for the fire that had been lit under the night sky of Marina Bay. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. The atmosphere inside the Ferrari command center collapsed into a suffocating stillness, a frozen instant where every pair of eyes widened and every breath caught in collective realization. There was no need for clarification, no need for words among the engineers and strategists. They all recognized the catastrophic mistake the second Hamilton's raw, unfiltered fury escaped across the airwaves. Formula One is a universe where nothing whispered remains secret, where every radio message, no matter how private it pretends to be, is instantly scrutinized, recorded, and dissected. Once those sentences burst out into the ether, the damage was irreversible. The pit wall scrambled, issuing frantic, clipped directives to suppress the leak, trying to plead with the FIA's operators to muffle the sound, to camouflage it beneath generic chatter. But such attempts were as futile as trying to stop an avalanche once it had already torn down the mountain. The words were alive, and they had already begun devouring everything in their path. Within seconds, rival engineers had passed the message through their headsets. Within minutes, journalists and broadcasters replayed the snippet on loop, each time with greater emphasis. By the time the checkered flag waved, social media was no longer a spark, it was an inferno. Hashtags trended globally, clips ricocheted across platforms, commentators and fans flooded timelines with reactions, outrage, and speculation. The once untouchable aura of Ferrari, that mythic image constructed over decades of victories, legends, and meticulous brand protection, now looked cracked, vulnerable, humiliated by the very champion meant to restore its glory. But the true explosion didn't happen on the track, it unfolded the moment the race ended. Hamilton guided his Ferrari back to park firm, a car that gleamed under the harsh lights but carried the weight of suffocating tension. He pulled off his gloves, removed his helmet with controlled precision, and climbed out with a cold detachment that made the air around him heavier. He didn't so much as acknowledge Leclerc, not even a fleeting nod, as if Charles had ceased to exist in his line of sight. That absence of recognition was deliberate, a sharp insult delivered in silence. Leclerc, however, wasn't the type to retreat. His body language radiated defiance, shoulders squared, jaw locked, eyes narrowing as he refused to yield an inch. Both men stood near one another physically, but psychologically they occupied separate battlefields, ready to clash at the slightest provocation. The so-called cool-down room became anything but cool. It transformed into a suffocating chamber where tension clung to the walls, vibrating in the silence between breaths. The cameras captured fragments, stiff posture, terse glances, the uncomfortable stillness of other drivers aware they were witnessing a collision of egos far greater than any on-track battle. And then, when the doors closed and microphones dimmed, the fragile facade shattered. Hamilton turned on Leclerc, his movements sharp, his voice carrying a force that cut through the room like steel against glass. His words were not shouted, but they were laced with a deadly precision that made them strike harder than any scream. You almost ruined everything out there. I had the corner, the momentum, the clean move, and you reacted like a beginner. Are you so desperate to prove something that you'd risk both our races just to make a statement? Leclerc's reply came like fire meeting oil. His glare was unflinching, his tone crackling with defiance, his accent thickened by fury that made every syllable feel like a blow. You believe you're bigger than Ferrari? You dive into gaps like a reckless lunatic, put us both in jeopardy, and then twist the blame toward me? This team is not your kingdom, Lewis. The red isn't yours alone. If you want to sit at the top, then fight for it properly. Don't expect it handed to you on reputation. The exchange was more than a quarrel between teammates. It was the collision of two worlds, two identities, two titans unwilling to bend. Hamilton's words carried the weight of a seven-time world champion who had built an empire of victories and demanded respect on instinct. Leclerc's retort embodied the pride of a man who had dedicated his entire career to Ferrari, who wore its history like armor, who refused to be overshadowed by a legend parachuted into his domain. The confrontation wasn't simply personal, it was symbolic. Every team member, every rival garage, every fan watching knew this was the kind of clash that reshaped seasons, divided loyalties, and wrote storylines too volatile to contain. Ferrari had envisioned a renaissance, a golden era forged by combining the might of Hamilton's legacy with Leclerc's youthful fire. Instead, they had ignited a civil war under the brightest spotlight imaginable. The pit wall couldn't hide it, the media couldn't soften it, and the fans wouldn't forget it. The cracks had widened, and in those few heated minutes after the race, the entire world realized Ferrari wasn't united, it was split down the middle. And from that day forward, every lap, every pit stop, every strategy call would be haunted by the knowledge that only one of them could truly dominate the Scuderia, and the other would have to bleed to stay alive. The clash escalated beyond control, transforming from a heated disagreement into a volcanic eruption of egos and emotions colliding under the suffocating pressure of Ferrari's garage. Hamilton's tone, sharp and unrelenting, sliced through the surrounding commotion. His voice wasn't simply raised, it roared with conviction, carrying the weight of a man unwilling to be questioned. He jabbed a finger firmly against Charles's chest, his eyes locked onto the younger drivers, every syllable echoing with fury and betrayal. "That was my corner, and you damn well know it," he thundered, his breath quickening with rage. "I saved both of us from total disaster. You should be thanking me for sparing this team humiliation. Instead, you twist it and make me look like a fool in front of the world." His words weren't just an argument, they were an indictment, a declaration of superiority mixed with wounded pride, each sentence designed to burn. Leclerc, usually willing to take the diplomatic path for the sake of peace, had reached a breaking point. His chest heaved as he tried to steady his emotions, but the insult still stung like a knife wound. This wasn't about strategy anymore, this was about respect. His steps forward were deliberate, each one closing the gap until Hamilton's finger no longer pressed against his chest but rested against pure defiance. The mechanics lunged into the narrow space between them, arms straining to push the two gladiators apart. Charles's voice erupted like a cannon, each word laced with bitterness that had been festering for months. "You called me an idiot to the entire planet. Do you understand what you did?" he shouted, spit flying as anger overtook restraint. "You didn't just attack me, you disgraced Ferrari. You shamed our colors, our history, our fans. What you did wasn't racing, Lewis. It was treachery." His tone was poisoned with betrayal, the kind that cuts deeper when it comes from someone you once admired, someone who was supposed to fight beside you, not against you. The garage froze as though time itself had halted. The mechanic's hands gripped tightly onto the arms of two men who looked seconds away from boiling over into violence. Engineers glanced nervously, exchanging silent looks of disbelief at how fragile the unity inside the team had become. The words Leclerc had unleashed hung heavy in the air, seeping into every corner of the room like smoke after an explosion. No one dared speak. No one dared breathe. Everyone present knew this was no ordinary confrontation. This was a fracture that could rip Ferrari apart from the inside. When they finally made their way back into the inner sanctum of the garage, the atmosphere was suffocating. At the heart of the chaos stood Frederick Vasseur, the man tasked with keeping control of an empire now cracking under the weight of its own stars. His arms were crossed, his jaw clenched, his expression carved into stone. His silence was more terrifying than any shout. His eyes flicked from Hamilton to Leclerc with the cold calculation of a man weighing the catastrophic consequences of letting two of the most talented drivers in the world cannibalize the very team they were hired to elevate. The drivers were directed into the team's private briefing room, but as soon as the door closed, the walls reverberated with noise. The verbal war reignited instantly, louder and harsher, fueled by the absence of cameras yet intensified by the knowledge that Ferrari's legacy was bleeding out behind those walls. Papers scattered as fists slammed onto the table. The air was thick with tension, voices colliding like thunderclaps in a storm that had no end. Vasseur had endured enough. He grabbed a thick binder from the table and slammed it down with such force that the noise silenced both drivers in an instant. The slap of paper against would echoed through the room like a crack of lightning. His glare locked onto Hamilton, unblinking, burning with restrained fury. His voice was low but venomous, every word deliberately punctuated. "Do you think this is acceptable behavior?" he demanded, his accent sharpening each syllable. "Do you really believe that wearing Ferrari red gives you permission to ridicule your teammate in front of millions? Every fan heard you. Every rival heard you. You humiliated this team on a global stage. Do you think this is what Ferrari stands for? Do you think this is what our legacy deserves?" Hamilton didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest like a man who refused to surrender even an inch. His gaze never wavered, his expression calm but simmering with defiance. When he finally spoke, his voice cut like a blade, controlled yet dripping with intensity. "I didn't humiliate Ferrari. I protected it. I told the truth when no one else had the guts to." Charles didn't back off, and I had to take the decision he couldn't. If I hadn't moved, if I hadn't reacted, we would have both been in the barriers. 2 wrecked cars, 0 points, and headlines around the world branding this the most embarrassing day in Ferrari's history. I prevented that. I saved you, I saved this team, I saved the season. And instead of recognizing that, you sit here and call me the problem. You want to crucify me for telling the truth? Fine. But don't pretend I'm the one destroying Ferrari. The danger is sitting right across from me. The room trembled under the weight of his words. Leclerc's knuckles turned white as his fists tightened, his jaw locked shut to stop himself from unleashing another tirade. Vasseur's breathing grew heavier, his eyes darting between the two men, realizing he was staring at a battlefield disguised as a team. The silence that followed was thick, electric, suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke, but every heartbeat in that room carried the same grim truth. Ferrari was no longer fighting Mercedes, Red Bull, or McLaren. Ferrari was at war with itself, and the scars carved in that briefing room would haunt every lap, every pit stop, every headline for the rest of the season. Vasseur didn't so much as flinch. Not a single muscle on his face betrayed hesitation. He leaned further across the table, his body language radiating authority and menace, his eyes narrowing into sharp slits as though he wanted to pierce straight through Hamilton. His voice dropped to a cold, controlled growl, each word soaked with frustration and a simmering fury barely held in check. Whether you believe it's true or not is irrelevant. You do not, under any circumstances, go on team radio and publicly humiliate your teammate by calling him an idiot while millions around the world are tuned in. That is not just a careless comment, that is dragging the name of this team, the symbol of Ferrari, through the mud. Do you realize the consequences? Do you have any idea of the weight this carries in Maranello, where every mechanic, every designer, every soul bleeds for this badge? Do you understand how it looks to the sponsors who fuel this machine? Do you grasp what it does to our reputation, to the image of the Scuderia that has stood tall for nearly a century? Hamilton shot back instantly, not waiting a heartbeat, his expression unyielding, his eyes blazing with defiance. He leaned forward as well, closing the distance as though ready to battle right there in the room. His voice was sharp, heated, unapologetic, carrying the intensity of someone who had lived his life under relentless pressure and refused to bow. So that's what you want? Silence? Lies? A smile plastered across my face while I'm shoved toward the wall at 200 miles an hour? You'd rather I pretend everything is fine, that nothing happened? I've fought for championships every year of my career. I've stared down rivals, faced the dirtiest tricks, and clawed my way back when no one believed I could. And I will never, do you hear me, never, allow anyone to play games with me, not even in red. I speak the truth. I don't sugarcoat. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what this team has been missing for years. Ferrari doesn't need another puppet. Ferrari needs honesty. And that's what I bring. The atmosphere grew unbearable, the tension so thick it felt like the walls themselves were straining to contain the rage ricocheting inside. Then, the silence shattered. Leclerc, who had remained seated, fists clenched tightly under the table as though trying to chain his fury, finally snapped. His chair scraped violently against the floor as he lurched forward, his voice erupting, raw and venomous, his emotions laid bare. Needed? You think this is what Ferrari needed? You're delusional. You're tearing this team apart from the inside out. You stroll in here with your 7 world titles as if they're a crown to place on your head, acting like some savior sent to rescue us. But all you've brought is destruction. You don't respect the history, the people, the culture that has existed long before you set foot in Maranello. You don't respect me, you don't respect the crew who've worked for years. This is not Mercedes, Lewis. This is Ferrari. Here, it isn't about you. It has never been about you. Hamilton's head whipped toward him with deadly precision, his glare venomous, his face carved into fury. He leaned closer, his voice low and vicious, every syllable deliberately sharpened to wound. Respect isn't given, Charles. It's earned. And after what I saw from you today, you've shown me one thing: you don't deserve mine. Not now, not ever. The room fractured beyond repair. Chairs screeched as they were shoved backward. Doors slammed so hard the echoes rattled through the hallways. Mechanics standing outside stiffened, trading nervous glances, whispering as though they had just witnessed a battlefield unfold behind closed doors. Word spread instantly, through the garages, through the paddock, through the journalists hungrily circling like vultures. The Scuderia, once the emblem of unity, pride and invincibility, was now splintering at its very core. Outside the room, the chaos spilled into the media frenzy. Reporters surged like a tidal wave, cameras raised, microphones shoved forward, voices shouting in unison, desperate to capture a single soundbite, a single fragment of the turmoil. Rumors ignited like fire in dry grass. Ferrari at war with itself. A legendary champion and the team's golden sun clashing like gladiators in full view of the world. The paddock became electric, journalists dialing editors with urgency, headlines being drafted before the dust had even settled. Ferrari, the untouchable, the mythical, the Red Empire, looked fractured, exposed, vulnerable. Hamilton was the first to emerge, his jaw locked tight, his stare fixed straight ahead, ignoring the chaos that swirled around him. Every question hurled at him was met with silence, his stride unbroken, his body language radiating defiance. Moments later, Leclerc followed, his expression equally unreadable yet betrayed by the subtle shake of his head, his refusal to engage only adding to the speculation. His silence screamed louder than words, his frustration written across every gesture. Finally, Vasseur walked out, slower, shoulders heavy, his eyes fixed downward. The look on his face was enough to tell the story. This wasn't a simple disagreement. This was a storm that threatened to rip Ferrari in half. The reality was undeniable. Ferrari had entered dangerous waters. Two alpha drivers, both unwilling to bend, one carrying the weight of 7 championships and legendary status, the other determined to protect his kingdom and carve out his own dynasty, now locked in open conflict beneath the same scarlet banner. The aura of Ferrari was bleeding out in front of the entire world, the myth unraveling into raw chaos. The paddock buzzed like a hive, fans and media bracing for what was coming next, because everyone knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of a civil war in red, and the question lingering in every mind was simple: who would survive the battlefield of Maranello?